prompt engineering. This is what we want to cover, but maybe not today. We will probably take 2 more sessions. So we get a quick introduction, then we take a look at the key concepts of prompt engineering. Then we do some examples of bad prompts because it's easier to spot what you shouldn't do than to exactly tell you what to do. And then you will do a practical exercises to do exactly that. In the beginning, it can be a little bit, not frustrating, but a little bit overwhelming how many different rules or best practices there are. But the more you get used to write prompts with a clear concept in mind, the easier it gets, and you don't just write prompts out of your further ado. But let's take a look at introduction to prompt engineering. And as usual, we're going to start with a definition of prompt engineering. So prompt engineering is basically the process of crafting effective prompts to guide the behavior of large language models. And the quality of this model's output is heavily influenced by the design of your input prompt. And this is important because you can directly achieve specific outputs without additional model training or fine-tuning. Because as I said, it's expensive. It's really expensive. So let's take a look at some examples of topics we have already covered when it comes into play. The first one is the topic from 2 weeks ago, which was information retrieval. Because here prompt engineering helps integrate retrieval augmented generation by designing queries for retrieving relevant context from documents before generating responses. So I just pulled up our system message from last time, and we saw that when we were designing this prompt and the system message for our ROT, where we first defined the prompt, then we fed in the context, and then we fed in the user questions in that order. And you can also see there's some pretty precise guidelines, which we'll get in more detail later. Another example is definitely text summarization, where prompts guide summarization tasks by specifying the style, specifying the tone or length of the summary. And we saw that when we were creating an abstracted summary of the lecture prescription, where we defined, for example, I think the length of the summary by telling LLM it should be 2 to 3 sentences, which exactly how long the summary was in the end. Good. In the example of sentiment analysis, prompts can classify sentiments without building a specific classifier, which we saw as well, I think, because we use GPT-4o. So we could just say something like, analyze the sentiment of the following review, then we feed in the review text, and this already works pretty well. I think we saw that with GPT-4, but it can even be improved if we would give like a couple of examples to the LLM. But as I said, we get to that later when we are talking about prompting techniques, and especially about few-shot prompting, as it is called. And then in the example of web scraping, our last topic, we saw that scraped data can be fed into the LLMs using structured prompts to derive insights of or construct knowledge bases. As an example could be extract key insights from the following famous quotes, which we did. And we also did that, and it worked out pretty good, if I remember. So before we continue, let's check out some. Yeah, we start with a basic but effective exercise in prompt engineering, which is designed to teach you how to guide an LLM's behavior using carefully structured system and user measures. It's always these two. So we also get into what's the main difference between those two and how and why do we want to separate it. So let's start by preparing, meaning import the relevant libraries and set up OpenAI. Again, you remember, please don't put the key hard-coded in there. So I would suggest use my helper function or write your own helper function to import the key from a text file. That's exactly what I do. So I'm going to import my own function. Again, you can download it or write your own. Just a file open function. Then, of course, we need, so from OpenAI, we're going to import OpenAI. We have the helper function. So now we need a RP key, which we save in RP key. And I can use my open file function and head over the path. It's usually stored in a folder. In my case, it's stored in my keys folder, and then I call the text file open. I am an AI RP key, one word.txt. And when we have our key, as usual, we can initialize the client using OpenAI and hand over the RP key. That's it. Let's run it, and it run successfully. So now what we're going to do, what is our objective? Our objective is we want to design a clear and constrained prompt that guides the model to classify text sentiment as either positive, neutral, or negative. I think we've done it already using a model from Hugging Face. Maybe you also did it with GPT-4o without a specified prompt. And now we really construct a prompt that is specifically tailored to do exactly this. The key components are, we have a system message. The system message in general sets the behavior and tone of the assistant. Then we have the user prompt. The user prompt feeds in the actual content for the analysis. And then we have the classic OpenAI article, which sends the structured prompt to the model and also define parameters like temperature, max tokens, configure for control output. All right. So yeah, we don't load any information. Let's just create some random review text. Let's say this lecture is really great. I love the content and the exercises. All right. So now we're gonna create a system message and also a prompt. So we're gonna start with the system message. Let's say you are a helpful assistant skilled in sentiment analysis. Only answer with positive, neutral, or negative. And let's get some emojis. Positive. Well, them should be able to handle emojis. Neutral. That looks neutral. And negative. Let's say this one. Okay. But you can also sometimes, it depends. You in earlier times or in the beginning, which is like 2 years ago, but it seems like in eternity. So in the beginning of GPT or ChatGPT, you had to sometimes put more emphasis on exactly what you're trying to do, and you can still do this today if you want to emphasize something. What you usually do is you scream, okay? So it doesn't hurt to do that. Yeah, I sometimes still do it, but I think for models for like GPT-4o, The latest version, you don't have to do this. If you use a smaller model or an older model, I would still probably emphasize stuff that is the most important part of a prompt. But that's why I emphasize sentiment analysis. All right, so let's get to the prompt. Because in the prompt we have to hand over the review text, so let's use F, and then I the sentiment of the following review. Let's do a line break just to make sure, and then let's hand over follow text. Okay, good. And then the last step, we just have to call our OpenAI. Yeah, you can copy paste the code from last time. Just maybe, yeah, that's also something. If you had helper functions, you could also just write a helper function that plus the API call, so you don't have to write it each time from scratch. But it's also good practice. So let's create where we need a model. Let's use GQT for O, and then we need messages. So what messages do we need? We need, of course, the role. We start with system, and the content of our system message is our previously defined system message. Great. Next role is the role of our user, and content this time is our previously defined prompt. All right. Let's hand over as well to parameters. Let's do temperature. Don't want to be too strict, so let's go with 0.7. Remember, the higher you go, the more creative the answer will be, so we don't go too high. And because we only want to get back the sentiment, we can limit the output to 50 is enough. It's just some boundaries for the model, just to make sure it doesn't run out of these boundaries. Okay, it should only answer with one word, so there's no need for more tokens. So that just helps the model to keep it in place. And then let's handle the output. All right, so let's repeat the text. Text is our review text. And then let's print out in a new line the sentiment, which is then saved in sentiment, right? Oh, yeah, but I forgot this part. Sentiment. So the sentiment is the response of the model, and so we still need to get the response, which is under choices. It's the first element, and oops, it's the message, and we want to get the content of this message. So then it's saved in sentiment. We want to print on sentiment. All right, so that's the most interesting part, the system message and the prompt. It's concise, it's precise, and we have a clear distinction between what the model should do and then what exactly we are handing over and what are we expecting as an output. So let's see if it works. Yeah, that's correct. And a constraint prompt that guides the model to classify text. Right? So we learned the key components, we saw the system message and the user prompt, and then we hand it over both to our. This has nothing to do with prompt engineering, but just a tip. What I sometimes do is, if you can also outsource the system message and the prompt into a text file, like like how I did it with the key, and then you load it into your application. So the advantage of this is you don't need to alter your code every time you change the system message or the prompt. You just change a text file, which is sometimes easier. Like if you have acted, like if it's an app and it's not in a container, but it just runs on a server, and you have access to the text file, you can just upload the text file, and then suddenly your application behaves differently. That's way easier and faster than to change the code and then upload the code again, cleaner and nicer. So, and let's go back to the slides, I guess, and see where we're at. All right, next time I would think, yeah, we do the key concept. So what are some concepts, or what are some best practices we can use when writing prompts for these tasks? So just to give you some best practices, some guidelines that will help you along the way. In general, I mean, it depends where you're looking for, but I would say there are 5 key concepts. And we now take a look at all of them in a little bit more detail. The first one is a clear role definition. And so that's the system message. The second one is explicit guidelines. Then we need to separate a concern, meaning we have a prompt and we have the system message, and they're there for different reasons. And then we need this is something I'm big on, emphasize on formatting, because as you can do a lot, it makes the response much more clear and easier to read if it's nicely formatted, and this is something LLMs are really good at. And then I would also add some fallback instructions, just in case something goes wrong. Then you have to have some instruction what you want to do, what you want the model to do then. So let's take a closer look at all of them, and let's start with the first one, which is a clear role definition. So what does that mean? It means it should clearly establish the assistant's role and also its objectives. To see what I mean, let's go back to our system message of our RAG model. How does the system message here do that? So it clearly establishes the assistant's role and its objectives by accurately and by concise, and also using the word phrasing provided content. These 3 things ensure that the model has a well-defined identity, and this then ensures that it stays focused on the task at hand. Okay, so this, what I just put into the green brackets, this is the most important part here. Next up, we have explicit guidelines. So the system message should also include specific rules to constrain the model's behavior, like use only the provided content and avoid any assumptions, or respond clear and in a professional manner. Like you can also set the tone here, like is it a professional tone? Is it a lightweight tone? Is it a simple tone? Is it a childish tone? Yeah, this is also something you will set in the system message. And these constraints reduce hallucination, which is a big problem in LLM models. So that's why it's so important to do this in this with this much detail. You may have been wondering, why do we need so many guidelines for a simple task like that? That's the reason for it. And these it also reduces incorrect or fabricated information, not only hallucination, and also keep the responses relevant. All right. Next up, we have the separation of concerns. So the system message sets, let's say, overarching behavior, while the prompt itself specifies the exact task and the input. For example, use the content to answer the user question. And this modular design improves the model's focus and performance. That's why we separated. All right. Yeah, here it's pretty clear. All right. Then my favorite one, the emphasis on formatting. The instructions to use clever formatting for readability encourages structured responses, meaning the model will probably create some bullet points, it will create some headings, and will maybe format the important stuff, bold or underline it. And this enhances user comprehension a lot. So that's probably my favorite part here. And finally, you should also write some fallback instructions. Fallback instructions tell the model in the prompt how it should react if an answer is unavailable. Like, for example, if the answer is, in our case here, simply not contained in the provided content, this avoids the risk of providing fabricated or, again, hallucinated responses when information is missing. Because, yeah, that's when building RAG models, this is a very important topic because oftentimes the first thing the model does, okay, the first instruction is I should take the content to answer the question, but then that question is not possible to answer with the content. So it just comes up with an answer that sounds like the content, but is actually not correct. So it's not easy to spot, but it's the first thing the model does, and that's the worst form of this hallucination. All right, do it. So great. Now that we know all of this, let's take a look at what not to do. Now we know what we should do, what are the key concepts, what are the guidelines. Let's take a look at some examples that are not good practice. So we're going to start. Let's start with some examples of bad prompts. And we also want to improve them using our 5 concepts we have just learned. So let's start with the first one, which was the clear role definition. So here's a bad prompt, right? You are a chatbot. Answer this question, this specific question, like a chatbot. So there's no specific guidance or no specific expertise. There's no tone. So it will result in a generic or maybe irrelevant advice. So the potential issues are the response may A, lack depth or overly generic. And also the system might just not sound authoritative or trustworthy because you didn't tell it how it should answer. All right. So yeah, to make it clear, let's take a look at an improved version of this prompt that has a clear role definition. So something like you are a financial advisor specializing in stock market investment, and your task is to provide clear, actionable, and beginner-friendly advice on how to invest in stocks. So that's your choice. You don't have to make it beginner-friendly. It depends, right? But this is you need to include how the tone is. So then you have all of this. So it will not lack that. It won't be generic, and it will sound trustworthy, like to beginners in that case, right? Okay, let's try something. Let's do 5. So we were here, and then the next one is the explicit guidelines. Yeah. So is another bad prompt. Summarize this article. The violation of this concept here is obviously the prompt lacks any specific rules about the summary's tone, about its length, or its content focus. So potential issues will be the summary might be too short, it might be too long, and also the key points could be omitted or the tone may not align with the user's needs. So let's take a look at a better one. So summarize the following article in 3 to 4 sentences, focusing on the technical details, avoid opinions, and maintain a neutral tone. That are very explicit guidelines in just 2 short sentences, right? Okay. So let's move on to the next one, which was separation of concerns. So in this example here, you are an assistant and this is your task. Find the answer to this question about renewable energy, and if you can't, explain what renewable energy is. So the system level role and the task-specific instructions here are combined into one prompt, and this causing potential confusion for the model. So the response might blend role setup with task execution, which will lead to incomplete or which will lead to conflicting outputs. So a better, improved version of this system message would be, for example, you're an expert in renewable energy. Your role is to provide precise, evidence-based answers to questions about renewable energy. And then we have an improved version of the prompt as well, like answer the following question: what are the benefits of solar power? If you cannot find an answer, state that it is unavailable and provide a brief explanation of solar power. Okay, that's way better. So then we don't have the possibility that the response might land with the task execution here. So that's why we have a system message, and that's why we have a prompt, and these are the two different roles of those two. All right, then let's move on to the fourth one, emphasis on formatting. When we are missing an emphasis on the formatting, like here, provide the steps for setting up a data pipeline, the prompt is clearly lacking formatting guidance, which is probably leading to an unstructured response. Like the response might be presented as a paragraph instead of a clear actionable list, or users might find hard to follow. So a better, improved version of this prompt might be something like along the lines: provide the steps for setting up a data pipeline in a numbered list, where each step is concise and starts with an actionable verb. Like, also good practice, give examples like install, configure, right? You can even try this out to see the difference and how easy LLMs pick up on formatting. And they will strictly produce output that takes this into consideration. So very good point. Last example is a fallback scenario. So the prompt is just instructing, right? It's just instructing, explain how to install TensorFlow on an Atari 2600. There's no instruction for when the task is impossible or when information is unavailable. So the model might generate an incorrect or, as I said, a fabricated response or some hallucination misleading the user. So a better, improved version of this prompt would be: explain how to install TensorFlow on an Atari 2600. If this task is not feasible, state clearly that it's not possible and also explain why. Okay, that would be a very better prompt. All right, quick summary of all the discussed 5 issues and their fixes. Again, this might not be complete, but these are the main 5 points in my point of view. So yeah, if you need some guidance, or this will also help you, and we will do an exercise now with the exercise, just save this as an image or print it out or whatever. So you have, this might come in handy when you just go over your prompt and take a look at all the concepts if you have not violated any of those. Good. All right, so let's see what we got as a practical exercise today to test your knowledge.